Gen Z isn't lazy. They're overwhelmed. You open your phone before your eyes fully adjust to the morning light. You scroll through 40 seconds of someone's vacation, a political argument, a dog doing something funny, a mental health tip, a tragedy happening somewhere in the world, and all of that happens before you've had a single sip of water. You put the phone down, you pick it up again, not because you want to, but because something in you just needs to. This isn't weakness. This isn't a character flaw. This is what happens when a brain develops inside a world that moves faster than any human brain was ever designed to process. If you were born between 1997 and 2012, your brain didn't grow up in the real world. It grew up in a digital one, and that changes everything. Not because you chose it, not because you're broken, but because the environment you developed in was fundamentally different from any environment a human generation had ever experienced before. The question isn't why Gen Z thinks differently. The question is, how could they not? Let's start where it actually begins, with the nervous system. When you were a child and you are part of this generation, your nervous system was still forming. The brain in childhood is extraordinarily plastic. It is wiring itself constantly, learning what is safe, what demands attention, what signals danger, and what brings reward. For most of human history, that wiring happened slowly, through boredom, through long afternoons, through friction, failure, and waiting. Gen Z didn't get that. From a very young age, the digital world delivered stimulation in a way that was instant, endless, and expertly designed to keep the brain engaged. Short videos, notifications, infinite scroll. Every swipe was a small hit of dopamine, the brain's reward chemical. And the brain, being the adaptive machine it is, adjusted. It began to expect stimulation at that speed. It began to find slowness uncomfortable. It began to associate waiting with anxiety rather than patience. This isn't a failure of willpower. This is neuroscience. The brain rewired around its environment. That's what brains do. They survive. And that's where the attention piece becomes important. People say Gen Z has a short attention span, but that's not quite right. Gen Z has a highly selective attention span. The brain learned to scan fast, assess fast, and decide fast whether something was worth sustained focus. Because in a digital environment, that was survival. There was always something more stimulating one swipe away. The brain became a triage machine. This shows up everywhere. In classrooms that feel unbearably slow, in conversations that drift after a few minutes, in the strange feeling of watching a 2-hour film and feeling like you missed something even though you were there the whole time. It's not boredom. It's a nervous system calibrated for a speed the physical world can't match. But here's the part nobody tells you. This same nervous system, this same scanning, hyper-alert, always-ready brain, it also absorbs information differently. Gen Z processes information in layers. They can follow multiple threads. They can read subtext with unusual precision. They are extraordinarily good at detecting inauthenticity. Because they grew up in an online world where everything was performed, curated, and filtered, they became fluent in reading what's real beneath the surface. They developed a kind of emotional radar that older generations simply didn't need. You don't develop that skill from comfort. You develop it from exposure. Now, let's talk about identity. Because this is where it gets deeply interesting. For every generation before Gen Z, identity formed mostly in physical spaces. School hallways, neighborhoods, family kitchens. You knew who you were, partly by how the people around you reflected you back to yourself. Gen Z formed identity in two places at once, the physical and the digital. And those two places didn't always agree. Online, you could be anyone. You could curate a version of yourself that was more confident, more aesthetic, more interesting. You could try on identities. You could find communities that understood you before anyone in your physical life did. And for many people, especially those who were different, queer, neurodivergent, or simply lonely, that was genuinely life-saving. But the other side of that is identity confusion. When you're always presenting a version of yourself for an audience, even a small one, you can lose track of where the performance ends and the person begins. You start measuring your worth in metrics: likes, views, followers. The validation becomes oxygen, and when it doesn't come, or when it comes and still feels empty, the silence is deafening. The American Psychological Association has documented that Gen Z reports the highest levels of anxiety and depression of any current generation. The CDC, in 2021, found that 57% of teenage girls reported persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness. The U.S. Surgeon General in 2023 identified social media as a central driver of what he called a loneliness epidemic among young people. These are not small numbers. These are not exaggerations. These are the measurable traces of what happens when a generation grows up with connection everywhere and belonging nowhere. Researcher Jean Twenge at San Diego State University has spent years studying this. Her work on what she calls iGen, the first generation to grow up with smartphones from adolescence, found something striking. As smartphone ownership rose, in-person socializing fell. The more connected Gen Z became online, the less time they spent physically present with other people. And physical presence is not replaceable. The nervous system regulates differently in person. Eye contact, touch, shared silence, the warmth of a body nearby. These are things the brain needs in ways that a screen, no matter how sophisticated, cannot provide. They are the most connected generation in human history, and the most alone. This is the part that requires real compassion to understand. Burnout in Gen Z doesn't look like burnout in older generations. It doesn't come after 40 years of labor. It comes early, sometimes in high school, sometimes in the first year of a job, because the stimulation never stops. The comparison never stops. The performance never stops. There is no clocking out from social media the way you can clock out from a workplace. The world follows you into your bedroom, into your bathroom, into the moments that are supposed to be private. The brain never gets a real rest. And a brain that never rests becomes a brain that starts to shut down not from laziness, but from exhaustion at a cellular level. This is not a moral failure. This is a physiological response to an impossible amount of input. And this is where the reframe matters most. Gen Z didn't become this way. They adapted to their environment, the same way every generation before them adapted to theirs. The difference is that their environment changed faster and more completely than any generation had ever experienced. They didn't choose the digital world. They were born into it, and they made sense of it the best way any human brain can by adjusting. That adjustment came with costs. The anxiety, the identity confusion, the loneliness, the burnout. Those are real. Those deserve acknowledgement, not dismissal. But that adjustment also came with gifts. A generation that is more emotionally literate than any before it, more willing to name mental health struggles without shame, more open to identities and experiences that fall outside narrow definitions, more skeptical of institutions that have historically lied to them, more creative, more adaptive, more fluent in the language of the future. The problem was never Gen Z. The problem is the world they were handed and the speed at which they were asked to make sense of it. If you are part of this generation, or if you love someone who is, understand this. The scrolling is not emptiness. It's a nervous system searching for regulation in the only environment it knows. The anxiety is not weakness. It's a sensitive system trying to process more information in a single day than previous generations processed in a month. The loneliness is not a personal failure. It's what happens when genuine human connection is replaced with a simulation of it. You didn't do this wrong. You were navigating something completely new, something no guidebook existed for, because no guidebook could have been written yet. This generation isn't weak. It's just the first to feel everything all at once. And that is not a diagnosis. That is simply what it means to be human in a world that moved before humanity was ready.